Now, moving to this, augmented and virtual reality present transformative opportunities around how people work, communicate and engage. However, one compelling avenue for augmented reality's transformative potential lies in its capacity to drive inclusion and gender transformation. Now, to help us understand how AR technology can serve as a catalyst for positive change is Professor Lissa Holloway Attaway from the University of Skövde in Sweden. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this evening on News at Prime. Now, gaming is traditionally thought of as a boys' thing, but that's changing, and there are more and more female gamers who are entering the scene. Talk to us about the gender gaming gap and leveling it up.
Yes, well, that's a complex issue in lots of ways. It is true that, in fact, the numbers are still not balanced across everything from, games educations to industry in many ways. Not just women, but other people are underrepresented. We can look at it from racial perspectives, but also class perspectives and from where they are in the world. But women in particular, it's a complicated issue because it has its roots in the fact that historically gaming technologies developed out of a military context, and were brought into universities often then in computer science programs. There was already a problem with women being represented in these programs, and it's replicated itself in the same kind of issues that what we call so-called STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, math, have had a difficult time embracing women. Because of lots of social biases against, women in technology and other things. So, as I said, it's not a simple issue. It's one that's changing, particularly in games education through lots of initiatives, several of which mine and my colleagues have been involved in. But, yeah, again, it definitely exists, and the numbers support that, women and other groups are underrepresented in games.
Yeah. Now, Professor, you're an associate professor in media arts, aesthetics and narration. What drove your interest in gaming?
Yes, whenever I hear that as my subject area, I have to laugh because it's so diverse in lots of different ways, but it does really represent. I actually come from a background, my undergraduate degree was in theater performance. And then my master's and PhD are in literature and digital media across a spectrum of technologies and media forms. So now that I'm in a game development department, I think it represents my way of looking at games as complex media objects. They're artistic, they're aesthetic, but they're also vehicles for storytelling, and they're technical objects. And we have to embrace them across, a real spectrum of interest to understand them. If we look at games as though they're some unique media form, then we misunderstand the variety. I'm also the research group leader for a group called the Game Research Group at my university. But in this case, GAME, G-A-M-E, is an acronym for Games, Art, Media, Experience. Again, as a way to represent, that, and we have people in my group who come everywhere from, cognitive science and computer science and programming to, art and theater and storytelling. And, I love that I'm in a very robust game development department with, 600 plus students studying across 12 programs. But I still don't want to call myself a games scholar in that sense. I think I'm a scholar of media, and with a particular interest in feminist perspectives and thinking about that.
And speaking of that interest in feminist perspective as well, how do you use augmented reality and gaming technologies to drive inclusion and gender transformation? Because when you think about gaming or games, one just thinks of video games, but it extends and it's quite broad as well.
Yes, as I said, I think it's important that we talk about gaming technologies, playable interactive technologies. Again, games are are a huge kind of field, and something like augmented reality, which I've been involved in using in a number of different ways. Augmented reality using a device like a mobile phone or something that uses the real world to trigger content on the phone and create a kind of digital layer. I've used it in museum exhibition spaces to teach about specific histories that might be underrepresented, but been part of a large project with a colleague here at the university where we've used augmented reality in conjunction with trigger images in children's books to take families and children out into the real world to explore the cultural histories of the different municipalities in the subregion where I live, to learn about Swedish folklore and history. But they can be used, again, other gaming technologies can teach about things like, climate change and, issues of migration. VR, AR are all technologies that can immerse you in these kinds of areas.
So they can actually work very well in terms of education as well. When it comes to, you obviously teaching at a university level, but when it comes to, for instance, primary schooling and high schooling and augmented reality, how can we use that in terms of education and helping students?
Again, I think the important thing about an augmented reality is that its aim is not to embed you into some other kind of virtual world. It's to keep you in the real world and to use your curiosity and your ability to discover, to learn about history by getting you to interact with objects or other ways of learning that aren't just straightforward from a book or a textbook, that can maybe put you out into the world to explore and to use the quote-unquote content of the real world with an eye toward, kind of the magic of what a digital interactive experience can do, and keep us in a kind of an innovative way to discover through, game-based learning and other kinds of perspectives. Of course, it comes with its own difficulty. You have to have a technical infrastructure in place to support that. Not all schools do, but I think, there's, again, an opportunity to use those tools.
When I also think about the context for a place like South Africa, which wouldn't have the kinds of resources that a Sweden would, it would be really advantageous for students and learners from different backgrounds, particularly from those backgrounds that don't have the resources as well, to be able to make use of this kind of education style as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, we're still going to have a digital divide, and there's going to be a gap between cultures. But it's important to understand that, again, often when I'm working with museums or working with other kinds of culture industries that want to engage some kind of gaming, we have to say, it doesn't necessarily require some high-tech infrastructure or tools or things that are expensive in order to, they're storytelling devices, and they're, again, that arouse curiosity and new ways of seeing a world, looking at a building that you've seen every day, but looking at it through an augmented reality layer where you might see how it looked, 500 years ago, or what was in this space that wasn't there before, can be quite simple, technically, actually, to do. So, yes.
Well, that's exciting to hear because, if there is a simpler way of doing it, there's certainly many countries that would be able to benefit from that. Just to track back a little bit when we spoke earlier about that complex issue of gender and how sensitive it is as well. But it's not just gender, as you mentioned, just race and class and the different barriers. While there is progress that is being made, and there are a number of women who are, but there's still a number of women who are experiencing abuse in gaming. Now, you've done a lot of work as well in terms of coming up with solutions. What are the kinds of abuse that these women have experienced when it comes to gaming?
Well, again, it's far-ranging, and it's not, again, much different from the rest of the world, other than the fact that we all know that, the online space can be a very toxic space. Social media, all of that, unmonitored, and it's impossible to monitor because of the far-reaching kind of path that it has. So there's a lot of, online harassment and things around, people either who are women, developers. The classic about 10 years ago, Gamergate was kind of a critical turning point for bringing attention to the kinds of online harassment that could lead to things like death threats and all of that. But the constant harassment over social media, but that can transfer also into the workplace. Again, if you're underrepresented, if you are a minority in the place, and however you look at that, and it doesn't only have to be gender, it's difficult to have your voice heard and amplified, and it's difficult to change a culture. At the same time, having just more, women or, other underrepresented people in place, if the culture doesn't change, it also doesn't make a difference. So we can't only count numbers, the statistics are important for us to look at, but, it's not from just one form. It isn't just about an overt harassment. It can just be about the fact there aren't places where you feel welcome, or it can be about a work culture that expects you to go into, a kind of a crunch mode and work nonstop until a project is delivered. And for people who might have families and it doesn't work that way. So again, numbers are important, but they don't show a whole picture. And we don't even understand. Some statistics show that even though women who come out of games educations and are excited to go into the industry, after 2 years, the dropout rate in the industry is triple what it is usually for men. And we don't exactly know why, which is why we need to keep doing more research around that. And again, I suspect it's not one thing, but it's a variety of issues. We can create an inclusive educational context, and then we can fill women and, other people with power to go out into the industry. But if the industry doesn't accept them, they're going to leave, and it's not going to change.
And that's not what we're looking for with an industry that has so much potential for opportunity and growth all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your insights with us. Good luck with all that research as well. That was Professor Lissa Holloway Attaway from the Department of Media, Arts and Aesthetics and Narration within the School of Informatics at the University of Skövde in Sweden.